Hello, this is another one of my videos on the first Baha'i 9-year plan from 1964 to 73. It comes from an old manuscript of mine, Universal House of Justice in the Baha'i World, 1963-73, and this particular video concerns expansion in the 9-year plan. As with the previous videos in this series, the main source is the messages from the Universal House of Justice, 1963 to 86, and there's also an old article I co-wrote with Moojan Momen on Baha'i Faith, 1957-1988, which provides some background. The primary objective of the 9-year plan was to continue and consolidate the expansion work of Sheikh Effendi's 10-year crusade. That was from 1953 to 63 throughout the world. The crusade had led to an enormous growth in the number of Baha'i groups and spiritual assemblies worldwide, as well as to the establishment of at least a nominal Baha'i presence in almost every country of the world, as well as in most significant dependent territories and islands. It had been an impressive achievement, and the House clearly wished to ensure both that the gains of the recent expansion were strengthened and not lost, and that all remaining unopened territories and islands were secured as quickly as possible. Some indication of the success of the 10-year crusade in terms of global expansion of the faith can be gained from a table of territories, countries, colonies, islands open to the faith in various time periods. Exactly what counts as a territory here is somewhat problematic, of course. Colonial territories became independent states, particularly during this period, which may or may not coincide with previous administrative divisions, and there were no fixed and objective criteria to determine which particular islands or island groups are to be listed separately. Thus, these figures have to be taken as indicative of the general trend rather than as precise indicators. By this measure, the 10-year crusade had been highly successful. Thus, while only 35 territories had been open to the faith by 1921, by 1953 this had risen to 128, and by 1963 to 259. It is of note that just over half of the list of territories in 1963, that's 131 out of 259, had been opened during the 10-year plan. The 9-year plan called for further expansion, including both the opening of new territories and the resettlement of others. Increases thus continued, with a new global total of 335 open territories given for Resvan 1973. This new figure included readjustments in the territories included to take account of the changes caused by the great wave of new sovereign states created as a result of decolonization. Two ready measures of the extent of Baha'i expansion are the number of localities in which Baha'is reside and the number of local spiritual assemblies which have been formed. Although the definition of what exactly constitutes a locality may vary somewhat from one country to another, and there have sometimes been changes in these definitions within a country over time, the locality statistics give an approximate picture both of the overall increase in the extent of the Baha'i presence worldwide and the relative size of the Baha'i communities in particular countries. As local spiritual assemblies can only be formed when the local Baha'i group has at least 9 adult members of 21 years of age or above, the existence of a local spiritual assembly indicates the presence of at least a small congregation of Baha'is, for that matter quite a large one, but at least a minimum of 9. When the statistics for localities and local assemblies were first presented in the early volumes of the Baha'i World book, the definition of the civic areas represented by each was not clearly established. and it was only as Shoghi Effendi had begun to regularize the statistics that he obtained from the various parts of the Baha'i world that more rigorous definitions for local areas based on civic districts were adopted. By necessity, the definition of these areas varied from one country to another, depending on the local administrative system employed, with a complex range of divisions including hamlets, villages, parishes, rural and urban districts, townships, and cities. As with the locality figures, the definition of a local spiritual assembly area may vary from one country to another, and in a few cases within a country over time. The 10-year crusade had seen more than a five-fold increase in the number of localities worldwide, from 2,700 in 1953 to over 14,000 by 1963, and an almost seven-fold increase in the number of local assemblies, from 670 to 4,437. By 1964, there were Baha'is residing in over 15,000 localities worldwide, and 4,566 local spiritual assemblies had been established, some 30% of the localities, that is. The 9-year plan goal was to more than triple the number of localities and triple the number of assemblies to over 54,000 and almost 14,000 respectively. The final achievements by 1973 were well in excess of these goals, to almost 70,000 localities and over 17,000 local assemblies. It is of note that both localities and assemblies were highly unevenly distributed between the continents, with about half of each being in Asia in both 1964 and 73, whilst Africa, with about 22% of the localities and 30% of the assemblies, and the Americas, with 23% of the localities in both years, and 16% of the assemblies in 1964 and 19% in 1973, account for most of the remainder. By contrast, Australasia and Europe have a very small share of the total, almost 2% of the localities and assemblies in the case of Australia, and between 3 and 5% of the assemblies in the case of Europe. Australia, of course, Australasia, I should say, has only a small population, but the population of Europe is very large, and the small number of localities and assemblies it had is an indicator of the slower rate of growth of the faith in that continent. Detailed official published figures for the size of various Baha'i populations are rare. As with most religions and religious movements, we must rely on estimates rather than exact figures, which may be difficult to assemble. In the present case, the Department of Statistics at the Baha'i World Center kindly provided me with their own estimates based on statistical returns provided by the various national Baha'i communities of the number of adult Baha'is, with the department's own extrapolations for the number of children and youth, for which many thanks to them. Based on those figures, these are the estimates I have for the number of Baha'is worldwide in 1963 and 1973, with the number of adult Baha'is increasing from 221,000 or so up to 1,199,000, and the total, remember this is an extrapolation, including youth and children, from 583,000 up to 2,444,000. There is considerable variation in the estimated number of Baha'is during this period between the various continents. Both in 1963 and 1973, Asia had the largest proportion with over 60% in both years. Africa was the second highest in 1963 with 25%, but going down to 14% by 1973. The Americas, the third in 1963 with 11%, going up to 20% by 1973. And then Australasia a mere 1.1% in 63, down up to 1.5% in 73, and Europe, the smallest proportion, 0.8% in 63 and 0.7% in 73, again indicating the comparative lack of success of Baha'i efforts in Europe. So, many thanks to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. Without them, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. Please do support my channel if you so wish. Like, comment, and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give a Patreon link below in case you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll talk about National Spiritual Assembly formation during the 9-year plan. Have a good day.